Turn the love up a little bit louder. Rep the king just a little bit prouder. Putting hope on the radio. See why? Gonna let them know it's the inspirational power hour.
You are listening to the Inspirational Power Hour podcast with your host, Chandra Wise. Welcome to this week's episode. Now, guys, we are celebrating Juneteenth. Now, Juneteenth has taken on a new meaning this year, a meaning like never before, and I'm all here for it, and I'm here to talk about it, all right? So I have some very special guests that's going to be stopping by. We're going to be talking about Juneteenth, and we're also going to be talking about everything that's going on in our society, especially with social injustice, with policing, with this being an election year, and much, much more. And I had so much to talk about that I actually had to break this up into 2 different episodes. So I'm incredibly excited to share our first guest with you. Our first guest is the director of the 2 museums of Mississippi, the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, as well as the Mississippi History Museum, Miss Pam Junior. Miss Pam has definitely been a staple in Mississippi culture, and I'm incredibly excited to talk to her about the significance and the history of Juneteenth. As always, make sure to follow online on Instagram, follow at Chandra Wise, on Twitter at Chandra Wise, and on Facebook, make sure to like the Inspirational Power Hour fan page. All right, guys, let's get right into this episode.
It's the Inspirational Power Hour.
Hey guys, you are listening to the Inspirational Power Hour with your host, Chandra Wise. And as you know, this week we are presenting a very special Juneteenth celebration of our show. And guys, listen, today I am incredibly excited to talk to this next guest. Now, she has been working in the community for years, and she's been such an instrumental part of preserving and presenting so much of our culture and our history. And she's here today to shed some light on Juneteenth and its significance. So, guys, I'm talking to none other than Miss Pam Junior. How are you, ma'am?
I'm well. How are you? How are you?
I'm fantastic. Listen, I'm so glad that you're taking time and having this conversation with me for our listeners.
Yes.
So, Miss Pam, as I mentioned, I first met you years ago working at, when you were working at another museum, but now currently, and because I don't want to mess up your title, give us your official title. I know you're working with some museums in Jackson, Mississippi. So what's your official title?
I am now the director of the 2 Mississippi museums, the largest museums in the state of Mississippi, the History Museum and the Civil Rights Museum here in Jackson.
And I have been to both of those museums, and they are dynamic. So congratulations on all of the work that you all are doing.
Thank you so much. The team would love to hear that. Thank you.
And so this week, we're celebrating Juneteenth. Now, I know for you, Juneteenth is nothing new, but I really wanted to talk about this because I think in 2020, it's probably taking on a little more heartfelt significance to our community.
Yes.
Would you be surprised how many people still don't know exactly what Juneteenth is, Miss Pam?
No, I'm not, because, at one time, people weren't really celebrating it. We were so busy doing the civil rights movement that it kind of moved a little bit down at the bottom of priority listing. But before then, when this amazing unofficial holiday came about in 1865, June 19th, when General Granger came to Galveston, Texas, and said, "You're free." That was a momentous moment for people in Texas. I always go back and want to note this before we go into Juneteenth, that May 8th of 1865, Columbus, Mississippi, the federal troops came into Columbus, Mississippi, and told those enslaved people that you're free. So it even got to Mississippi and Columbus before it even got to Texas.
Wow.
Yes, and a lot of people don't know that. They call it Ada May Day, and they celebrate Ada May Day in Columbus, Mississippi. They talk about that. That was important that I always say May 8th of 1865. There's a lot of history you can go through with a lot of years and a lot of generals and talk about that, but I'm going to keep it really brief. But then let's get to June 18th, when those federal troops came into Galveston, Texas. And on June 19th, the general, he made that proclamation that you're free, without going into order with order number 3 that he read off to these enslaved people, that you are free. And so that was important, because then for them that is Freedom Day. They realized that you don't have to work on the plantation, that you can go out as skilled laborers because, of course, I always say, these Africans, they built this country. These Africans built the United States of America. They built it. And so they have rights and all the privileges. Of course, they were taken away after Reconstruction in 1890 Constitution that was written. But that day of freedom will always be there for them, will always be there for us. So I not only look at June 19th, but I also look at May 8th.
So, with everything that's going on across our nation right now, let's talk about the push for a lot of the Confederate monuments that we have, not only in Mississippi, but across our nation. Let's talk about this push to have those removed. I'd be really interested to know your thoughts about that.
I think that what's going to happen now in 2020, the 21st century, is that now we're really looking at ourselves. I've always been a proponent for my history and knowing where I'm from and understanding my people. I think now that we can sit down and have those conversations, and people are interested now in us. But are we interested in ourselves? That's where I'm going to go with this conversation. Are we interested in knowing who we are? I'm from the Tikar people, and so knowing that I'm from the Tikar people, these are griots, these are storytellers, creative people. I'm falling right in line with who I am. So I think we need to understand our DNA, so that when people are interested in talking to us about who are you, then I can talk about my lineage. I always tell people, other folks, they know about who they are. We have no idea who we are. So it's time for both of us, all of us, to learn about each other and then bring that thing as one, because we are from each other. And that if we do that, how strong we can be. There's a lot of monuments and things that need to come down. And yes, and one day they are coming down, I'm sure of that. But right now, I want us to come together and to galvanize ourselves, to be strategists, as the veterans of the Civil Rights Movement tell us. Organize, form committees, come together, because there's work to be done, and we need to continue the work. We don't need to stop with marches. We need to continue the work, because there's more work to be done. I'm coming out the day after and saying, where's everybody? Where's everybody? What are you doing? How are we coming together? Are we bringing in some of those old folks who were veterans of the movement? Because what they did, it did work. So it's the strategizing, it's the mobilizing, it's the organizing that I'm not seeing, and I want to see that more.
So you're absolutely right. So guys, make sure that you stick around, because today, later on in the show, I'm actually talking to the Mississippi State Director of the NAACP, Corey Wiggins, and we're talking about that because we definitely need, there definitely needs to be a day after. We need some next steps, because I think this moment is too important.
It is, and just, Martin Luther King's last book that he wrote is Where Do We Go From Here? That's where we are right now.
And if people wanted to learn more about Juneteenth, is there a specific resource that you recommend?
Well, no, I just, as I tell everybody, Google is amazing. Just put in history of Juneteenth, and they'll be able to get all of it, anything that they need to know, and how people are celebrating. They're actually celebrating in Washington, D.C. Secretary Lonnie Bunch is a part of the celebration with the Smithsonian. There's a lot of activities that are going on, and I hope that I'm out there in it on this weekend.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pam. We appreciate you in all of your work.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Pam Junior. Make sure to check out the 2 museums of Mississippi. When they open back up, make sure to go in and support. All right, up next is my conversation with gospel recording artist Ted Winn. Ted has been extremely vocal about social injustice and about the role of the church in that fight. So let's get right into my conversation with gospel recording artist Ted Winn. Hey guys, you are listening to the Inspirational Power Hour with your host, Chandra Wise. And this week, guys, we are continuing to celebrate, this is Juneteenth, but I think right now this year, Juneteenth is really taking on a very heartfelt purpose for so many reasons. But right now, I am incredibly excited to talk to this young man. He is so knowledgeable, so talented, so well-informed, and he uses that to inform others and uses his voice in such a significant way. So guys, today I have on the phone with me my brother Ted Winn. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing as well as I can. How are you?
Listen, all things considered, I'm good, I'm blessed, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you.
So Ted, listen, so much that we could talk about, but I'm just going to kind of jump in here a little bit. You have always been so vocal, using your voice on issues that affect us each and every day, and I've always appreciated you for that. We know this. It's difficult to make generalizing statements, about the church, quote unquote, the church. But I think you and I both have been doing this long enough that I think we can have some really honest and hard conversations, right? So the Black church has a history of being in the forefront in the fight for civil rights and social injustice. So my first question, is the 2020 Black church living up to that legacy?
Absolutely not. The civil rights movements and justice movements that we have seen historically have been birthed out of our faith traditions, right? So we have seen them come out of churches and religious movements. Black Lives Matter is the first significant civil rights movement that is not born out of church. And I think that is indicative of the fact that Black church is not leading this conversation. And I think there are a lot of reasons as to why, but that is the truth of the matter. To your question, the Black church is not living up to, at least in my opinion, to where it should be in leading these issues, these conversations.
Now, that's an ouch statement, and I think if we're honest about it, we have to ask ourselves, why do you think that is?
Well, I think that in many ways, coming into, the year 2000, just a lot of what has happened is what I call an assimilation to whiteness, right? And so we had the civil rights movement. That's the late 60s. You have to put that in context. And so now we've gone through the 70s and into the 80s, and you start to war on drugs and, it's crime bills being written and things incarcerate a lot of Black and brown people. And I think what happened is we start being influenced by prosperity gospel. We start being influenced by the entrance of the mega church and thinking more about numbers and affluence than the substance of the justice issues that our people were still contending with. And so you also started having these anecdotes outside of church with, Oprah Winfrey and, Michael Jordan and Will Smith and et cetera. So you had Black people who had begun to do well, who had begun to get acclaim and have a certain level of influence. And so a lot of times people use those anecdotes as, some example of how far we've come, how much progress we've made. Then, oh my God, we had the historic election of Barack Hussein Obama, and it's like racism is dead. Like we're in a new era. We're post-racial, and none of that has ever been true. And I think that we've failed our people by not continuing to have honest dialogue and look at the data points as they were and are about where we are as a people and what the problems still are in 2020.
Because they're obviously still here.
Mm-hmm.
At our church, the other week, a creative team, Kirk Franklin, Strong God for us to do, right? And they said it's going to take us 2 weeks to get it together. You think that'll be too long? In my mind, I was like, because I know how our attention spans are, I was like, well, 2 weeks might be too long, but they did it this past Sunday. The sad part is it's still happening, and it was still just as relevant as it was weeks ago.
Well, this is the truth of the matter. I'm doing a social justice EP, and one of the things that I did was I recently covered Marvin Gaye's Inner City Blues. That song was released in 1971, 49 years ago. I did not have to alter one lyric. Everything that he said then is still true today. And even if if the focus shifts, we know America, so we know that can happen. It won't. You have like people saying, Black Lives Matter. You have it painted in the streets. You have, people having these conversations. You have corporations giving colleges money and people's money and organizations money. Like, you cannot undo racism in a week or a month, right?
Right.
Like, this is a 401-year process of intentional, systemic, precise, sophisticated construction of systems that have continued to adversely affect Black folks in this country. So you have to do a lot of work to deconstruct that and then put corrective measures in place to, quote unquote, right those wrongs. So, saying if they didn't do Strong God this week, I promise you they can still do it in 2022, and we'll still be, hopefully we would have made some progress, but we won't be at, in some, equal place by then.
So do you feel, first of all, let me ask this. Do you feel that some artists, specifically some gospel artists, are hesitant about being vocal about certain issues because they feel it might damage their careers or hurt their careers?
Yes, I do. I think that some people are definitely apprehensive about having these conversations because they don't want to upset people, and they are signed to labels that have shareholders and, white executives and people and some Black people who are just not championing these conversations, who are just, feel like it's, not what they should be talking about. I think that's some people. I don't know that it's most. I think it's a few. I think the other part of that is a part two of that is it's just not been a part of the culture. I mean, you and I just talked about that, like Black church is not leading in these issues. So why would Black artists be, leading in these conversations? It's not even been a part of Black church culture, at least in the last, 20, 30 years. It just hasn't been. So it's not even something that I think a lot of them in their defense would even really think about. And then thirdly, you have those who live in dual spaces, who are Black gospel artists, but still, have a little bit of resonate to some degree in the CCM world and have some of those friends and platforms that, some of those pastors who are friends and they have access to some of those platforms. So I think that makes some of those people shy away from having these conversations as well.
And speaking of conversations, we've seen some conversations go all the way to the left this week. Ted, how can we do better in these conversations? I think, first of all, I do have to recognize the attempt to have these difficult conversations, especially across cultures between whites and Blacks and, and all of that. But how can they be more impactful and more effective?
Well, in a word, honest. And the problem with these conversations that are being had is that they're not being had. Well, first of all, let me set this context. If you are a white pastor who, especially if you have a significant amount of Black members, followers, parishioners, what have you, and you want to have a real conversation, a real honest one about racism and, these justice conversations we're having, if we're going to take you seriously, you need to have them with either Black pastors who have been out front about these things, like the Jamal Bryants, like the E. Dewey Smiths, who very much Dr. Freddie Haynes, who've been having these conversations, or with Black thought leaders who actually occupy those spaces. Like, don't tell me you're serious about having a conversation, but you're having it with people who don't even talk about these things, who are not educated on these things, who cannot, and also people may not feel empowered in those moments to speak truth to power. One of the things, to your point about being an independent artist, is I don't feel beholden to any interest of anybody. And that's why I'm going to always say what I feel like is the right thing to say. I'm going to speak in ways that I feel like are honest about our plight, because I live and breathe these issues as a person who has lived in this skin all my life. And so I'm very concerned about, every marginalized group of people, to be candid, but in this moment I'm talking about Black folks. And so I'm very passionate about these issues. I have 8 nephews. I have 4 nieces. I have 4 sisters. I think about them all the time when I'm having these conversations. And then people who I don't know. I didn't know Rashard Brooks, but I cried watching his cousin talk about him as a human being. because I felt that moment. And so I think that we have to, if we're going to have these conversations, they have to, again, at the core, be honest. And people are challenged in many instances by having honest dialogue, because you have white pastors who say, look, I have black members, I invite black artists on my platform. That has to mean I'm not racist or complicit, and that's just not true. It's not true. And we have to be honest about that, and they have to own it. I said something on my page recently. There are three kinds of white people in America. You are either a racist white person, you are a white person who is complicit in racism, or you are anti-racist. And an anti-racist person, which is who we need all of you to be, is someone who is vocal and actively working to deconstruct racism.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need you to be. Not just like, I got black friends. That don't mean nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, guys. Again, listen, I'm talking to recording artist Ted Winn. And Ted, you are definitely one of our thought leaders in this space. We appreciate you so much again. So I have a couple more questions. So let me ask you this. How can the black church, we talked about the black church, but how can creatives and artists play their part in this fight for social injustice?
I think that everybody has a level of influence, a sphere of influence. I don't care if you have a Twitter feed and you got 10 followers. That's 10 people you have some degree of influence on, or you can get a message to. And part of what I think we can do, even if we're not doing music that reflects the time, we can talk about certain issues. We can talk about our own experiences, right? We can point people to different organizations to support. If we want to give money to HBCUs or United Negro College Fund or Color Change or NAACP or however you want to do it. If you just feel like, look, let me do my part is I'm going to go out and find somebody who needs mentoring or who needs a pair of shoes, or you can do whatever you can to help us all move forward. But to be honest about where we are, I think is the most important thing. And everybody's not an advocate, right? And so I understand that, and I don't think everybody needs to be. But whatever it is that you feel, is important to you, however you feel led to do whatever that thing is, I think you should just make sure that you do that. And I think that the challenge is when people don't do anything or don't say anything, and more egregious is when they are defending people who are not, saying the right thing and handling this properly. Like the Louis Giglio conversation with the CEO of Chick-fil-A and Lecrae, and there were a lot of people very disappointed in how that played out. I was, incensed by the things that Louis Giglio said, and it was really troublesome. And a lot of people were upset that Lecrae didn't say anything, just kind of nodded his head, and he did address that in a later post. And I'm not here to critique Lecrae or police black people. That's not That's not my thing. So what I am saying is that what Louis Giglio said was problematic. And so even if Lecrae didn't say anything, I said something. And other people have said something. And so those of us who see those things have to be willing to speak truth to power and call it, and pardon my pun, but my analogy, but we have to be able to call a spade, right? If you see something and that's what it is, then just say this is what it is. So we know what we're dealing with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, one way or another, there's going to be an after this. And, my personal prayer is that we don't go back to exactly how things were, because how things were, it wasn't working, right? What does after this look like for you? And when I say I'm talking about after we've kind of gone back to a normalcy from the COVID and gotten back to, what we know as normal, how do we continue this fight? Like, what does this look like for you?
I think that for me, I've been really candid with you. This is a fight that I think extends beyond our lifetime. I told somebody I was excited to be alive in this moment and felt a little emotional about, likely not being alive to see the full equity of people realized in America. Again, we're talking about 250 plus years of slavery. We're talking about 100 years of Jim Crow. We're talking about a fight for civil rights, right, as didn't happen until the late 60s. And so we're only about 50-something years removed. Here's the thing that gives, hopefully helps your listeners to have to crystallize this moment. I am the first. My mother was born in 1952, right? I am the first person in my family, my generation, born with all of my rights.
Wow.
Me. Not my mother, not my grandmother, me. Because my mother didn't have all her rights in 52 when she was born. That didn't happen until she was in high school. And so
wow.
we really set that context. I think we really could help. It helps us to really understand how deeply entrenched this is and how much work we have to do. So I think what I want to see after this is continued conversations around how we can deconstruct racism, how we can create spaces for Black equity, and just give Black people the equal footing that we deserve in this country. And that's going to take a lot of work. I mean, I honestly feel like it doesn't happen without some form of a reparations plan, but it's going to take a lot of work. And that doesn't necessarily mean just give us a check either. Like I have a multi-pronged one, and people who follow me can check it out. But it's this work we have to do. So it's going to take a lot, and we got to, we have to, really be committed to the process. And again, not just for ourselves, but for the generations following us, which is what our foreparents have always done. When Black people were fighting to be in the Civil War to try to remove slavery, they knew it wasn't going to be equal the next day, but they knew that there was a day that Chandra was coming and Ted was coming, and other people were coming. When Dr. King was out there, and people were writing, and the Freedom Riders, and people who were SNCC and all these SCLC and all these organizations were out there fighting and marching, and John Lewis was getting beat crossing the bridge. They knew that other generations were coming. And so we have to have that same commitment to future generations to fight for the things that they deserve.
Absolutely. Guys, again, this is Ted Winn. He's talking to us as we are continuing this conversation. Ted, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your voice and your input. Now, I'm going to tell you something else. I remember after the premiere of the Clark Sisters movie on Lifetime, and someone tweeted something about that scene where Dr. Mattie Moss Clark, where she was confronted with the council of bishops from the Kojic Church, and I think it just kind of started a conversation just about, for lack of a better word, I'm just going to kind of say the culture of, let's just say, maybe misogyny in the Black church. Can we say that? And so. Yeah, and I think you tweeted something, I tweeted something back, but in lines of having that conversation, and that's definitely a conversation that I would love to have sooner than later, because that's another thing that I think we need to address in order for our church to really realize its full potentials. We got to unpack a lot of stuff.
We really do. I mean, patriarchy and sexism and misogyny and misogyn war, to be specific about the ways in which we treat Black women, are very important conversations that we definitely don't have. I mean, it's so sexism and racism work hand in hand, and they are so normalized in our culture that we don't even think about them. Like we're not even alarmed that you could turn on, your radio or any streaming app and hear women demeaned in the music. We don't even think about it, and I don't want to upset the audience too much, but we don't, I am such, so what happened is, very quickly, I've been reading these books from a few authors who define themselves as womanists, and they moved away from the term feminist because feminist has a white connotation to it that did not, and the feminist movement didn't really include Black women, and so they have a different idea about what that looks like, and so I consider myself a womanist as a person who is feverishly fighting for the equity of women as well, right? Specifically Black women in this conversation. And I think that sometimes the power dynamics that are informed by a Christian narrative, and then enforced even more by white supremacy, just really disempower women. And I may have asked somebody this before, and my friend was thinking about it. I said, if you're a woman, right, and you're dating a guy, and you guys have been dating for 3 years, and you have a great relationship, and you feel like, hey, this is going to lead to, what we're going to get married, and we're going to all that. That woman, in a traditional context, does not have the power to move that relationship to engagement. Mm-hmm. She has to wait until he is ready to propose to her, and then she responds yes or no or whatever she's going to. Now, she doesn't have to marry him, but my point is that's how the power dynamic is set. Here's the other thing. As a woman, I'm going to make some assumptions and the point of this conversation. Your last name is Wise, yeah?
Yes.
Whose last name is that?
It was my mother's maiden name, which was my grandfather's name.
Okay, so the name came from a man.
Mm-hmm.
If you get married, traditionally, you're going to change your name to your husband's last name.
Mm-hmm.
So women in our social societal construct, they don't even have their last name.
Right.
The way you are identified is through a man's name, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get too deep in the weeds, but this is how I think about these things. And it is why in a lot of Latin culture, women keep their last name and they hyphenate it, so they don't lose their kind of maternal or matriarchal identity. So I just think that the way we think about these things, we have to have some really deep conversations, to your point, at a certain point in time, just about the equity that I feel like women deserve, the equal power that women have, because I don't see women as lesser human beings. Mm-hmm. They're equal human beings. They have the same ability and aptitude and intellect and determination and goals and everything as a male does. And so I just think that we have to reimagine what these things can look like, so that when we're talking about relationships in that way, we're talking about partnerships and not hierarchy.
Absolutely. I agree.
I know some folks might not like that, but that's how I feel.
That's okay. I think it's time that we do have some of these difficult and some of these challenging, conversations around all of this stuff, because it's still there. It's still so deeply rooted in the culture of our church, which affects, our home, our society, everything, and even the way we teach our young girls, over the years, and I'm not gonna go into too much on the air right now, but over the years, I've had to have some really difficult conversations with some people about, just some things I observe, and hey, if this is what we're doing, then because there were moments for me where I'm like, okay, if this is who we are, I need to make a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had several of those moments, but I'm thankful that I was in a place where my voice was heard, and where some things were rethought and we were able to kind of change it and do some things differently, because, we have a lot to undo, I believe.
We have a lot to undo. There's a young artist I just discovered. Her name is Charity. She's a young R&B artist from Detroit. I mean, phenomenal. If your listeners are, care about that kind of music and are into it, it's a really wonderful project. And she really deconstructs a lot of these ideas. She has a song called Cake, which really speaks to the fact that there should be more celebratory moments and goals in a woman's life than just getting a wedding cake.
Mm.
And the way that she really breaks it down, she talks about how we groom young girls from, very young, or girls from a very young age to be brides or wives, and not necessarily to be individuals. It's just really fascinating to listen to how she talks about it. And again, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but I definitely feel like that's more. We need to have more of those conversations at a point in time.
Okay, so Ted, I'm going to have you back, and we're going to have to kind of delve into that a little more.
Okay, I'm here for it.
Again, thank you so much just for being vocal, for using your voice, because it is so important. I think a lot of times when we do that, we, give people the permission to do the same even before we realize it. And I think you have done that for so many other people. So thank you so much. I will continue to keep you in my prayers. Tell everybody how they can follow you, get your music, support you.
You can please, if you're on social media, please follow me. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. It's Ted Winn, TEDWINN. And, shout me out, comment. I love, civil discourse. I'm open to that. But I definitely want to continue to use my platform to highlight these issues. One of the things I have found out that's really fascinating is I know a lot of people who follow me don't really look at a lot of traditional media. So sometimes I'm posting stories that people say, hey, I didn't even know that happened. I hadn't heard about that. And that's one of the reasons that I continue to use my platform not just to talk about, I don't even really talk about my music that much anymore, but just really talk about what's happening in the world, and things that I feel like are important for people to be informed about.
And he's right. He doesn't talk about his music enough. Ted Winn has one of the greatest voices ever. I know, I'm serious. One of my favorite vocalists ever. You really do. And not only your voice that you use to, to highlight social justice, but also your gift, your instrument is just amazing.
I thank you so much. Thank you again. I appreciate you for saying that and for sharing your platform and for giving me an opportunity to speak to your listeners about these very important issues. So thank you for, just creating this space to have this conversation. It's very important.
Thank you so much for checking out my conversation with Pam Junior and with Ted Winn. I hope that you have been informed, and I hope you've been empowered for us to continue this fight for social justice and for us to continue to celebrate our culture and our history. All right, make sure to stay connected online on Instagram and on Twitter. Follow at Chandra Wise, and on Facebook, make sure to like the Inspirational Power Hour fan page. As always, I tell you to stay focused, stay encouraged. Remember that we're blessed to be a blessing to somebody else. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time.
It's the inspirational power.